Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles from the Hindu for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which also provide you the much important avenue to practice daily answer writing, in the first topic, we'll try to decode a very interesting concept as highlighted by the today's editorial that why the youth is not aspiring to head the Gram Sabhas. Then in the second topic, we'll try to demystify the climate hoax and climate alarmism. Followed by the simplified topics, we will take up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026. So, stay tuned. The editorial today highlights the issue of missing youth from the third tier of governance, that is, Gram Sabha, Gram Panchayat, and also thus provide for some innovative suggestion. The issue which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of local self-governance. So the article today, which has actually been written by a 1995 batch IAS officer, actually showcases the important significance which Gram Sabha holds in India's democratic architecture. In this context, you guys can recall the Summit for Democracy 2021, which was hosted by USA, where our Honorable Prime Minister highlighted the republics of Lichvis and Shakyas of the Mahajanpada period, as well as the codification of the democratic principles, which is actually showcased through the Uttaramirur inscription, which date back as far as to 10th century C, thus establishing our country as not only the largest democracy in the world, but also as the mother of democracy. This Uttaramirur inscription, which belongs to the Chola king Parantaka, who ruled from 907 to 953 C, actually tells us about the functioning of a village assembly or Gram Sabha as far back as 10th century C. Where we find this Uttaramirur inscription? In the Vaikunth Perumal temple in Kanchipuram. The Uttaramirur inscription of Parantaka Chola tells us about the functioning of a village assembly which is called as Ur. And this village assembly consists of 30 wards or kudums, where to become a member of committee, the committees which are called as Varyams, there takes place a election, and this election takes place through a system called as Kuda Volai system. What is Kuda Volai system? So let's say for example there are 3 candidates. The name of the 3 candidates will be taken, kept in a jar, and then a young boy will be called, and that young boy can pick up any name from that jar, and that lucky person will be considered as a member of these Varyam or committees. The Varyams or committees which actually performed different kind of functions. For example, there existed Samvatsara Varyam, which acted as a kind of an annual committee. The annual committee, the membership of which was actually restricted to the elders who had served in other committees, like for example Tota Varyam or a garden committee, Eri Varyam or a tank committee. Even at that point of time, there also existed a specific committee to actually kind of control the production and consumption of gold at that point of time, and that was called as Pawn Varyam. Now keep this in mind that this Uttaramirur inscription does not represent a true picture of democracy. Why? Because there did not existed the concept of adult franchise. So it does not imply that everyone who was living in the village at that point of time actually had voting rights. That we can see because the election was taking place through the system called as Kuda Volai system. Similarly, not everyone was actually eligible enough to become a candidate in the election because there were certain qualifications which were laid down for a nominee. First and foremost was that you should be a wealthy person, obviously. So for example, you should be a owner of a tax-paying land, whose size shall be at least 1/4 of a valley or an acre and a half. Then this land requirement was only toned down if you have learned at least one Ved or Bhasha, so you are a very literate person. Then you should be having some land holding as well. You should be having a residence in a house which is built on self-owned land. There was also an age limit that you should be at least 35 years of age to contest election. In this case, recall the age limit which we have for president and governor in our country. Both for them, the age limit is actually 35 years. Then you should also be possessing knowledge about the mantras as well as Vedic literature. So yes, there existed a village assembly there was a specific function which was provided to various committees and variums, and a kind of a loose election system also existed. Keep this in mind that this kind of Gram Sabha also used to exist in the medieval period as well. So for example, you guys can recall Sher Shah Suri, who ruled from 1540 to 1550, where he divided his administration into 4 parts. The first were the estates, the modern day states, which were called as Iktas, and they were headed by Shikdar. Then there were districts which were called as Sarkars, and they were headed by Faujdar. Then there were towns, the towns which were called as Parganas, and they were headed by Amin or Munsif. And ultimately the 4th tier of governance at that point of time used to be Gram Panchayat. So keep this in mind that it was Sher Shah Suri, the first ruler, who actually provided legal recognition to these Gram Panchayats in our country, and thus provided them autonomy to create their own laws and administer as per their own rules, customs and traditions. So when our country started moving towards independence, Gandhiji envisioned these Gram Panchayat as a decentralized form of governance, where these Gram Sabhas will actually act as self-governing units, and thus he propounded the idea of Gram Swaraj. However, when our constitution was adopted on 26th of November 1949, keep this in mind that it did not provided constitutional status to Gram Sabha or Gram Panchayat. However, the constitution included an article that was Article 40, a directive principle of state policy which basically directed the state to organize such Gram Panchayat and endow them with certain functions which actually allow them to act as self-governing units. Following this directive principle of state policy under Article 40, it was actually Balwant Rai Mehta Committee which was constituted in the year of 1957, which for the first time suggested for democratic decentralization in our country by the creation of a 3-tier Panchayati Raj system, where there will be Gram Panchayat at the village level, then there will be a creation of a block, and over that there will be a Jila Parishad. For this Gram Panchayats, there will be a direct election. So, the Gram Pradhan or the representative of the people will be elected by the people living in that village. Then the chairman of the Jila Parishad will be the district collector, hopefully you people in the future. These ideas were actually accepted by the National Development Council at that point of time, but it actually left on the states to whether adopt these ideas or not. Adoption of which led to Rajasthan becoming the first state to actually establish Panchayati Raj in the year of 1959. Then there was Ashok Mehta Committee, which actually for the first time suggested to provide constitutional status and thus more teeth to these Gram Panchayat and Gram Sabha. The committee also suggested that they shall be also provided with compulsory power of taxation to all the Panchayat. And at the same point of time, the state governments shall not supersede the Panchayat's function. At the same point of time, it was Ashok Mehta Committee which also suggested for the first time for the reservation of seats for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, thus providing representation to the most vulnerable section of the society on the basis of their population in the state. Then there was creation of GVK Rao Committee 1985. Which actually criticized that how in the states where such Gram Panchayats have been created, there has taken place the bureaucratization of development process. Thus, these Gram Panchayat actually act as grass without any root. And thus specifically directed that the district collectors of the future shall act as a coordinator instead of master of ceremony, and there shall be a greater role which shall be provided to these Gram Sabha. Then there was appointment of Thangan Committee of 1988 which provided for the most innovative suggestions. For example, there shall be a fixed tenure of Panchayat just like Lok Sabha, that will be 5 years. Then there shall be a specific list of subjects which shall be provided for the functioning of the Panchayat. At least 1/3 of the seats shall be reserved for the women. To actually kind of dilute the finances from the central to the state to these Gram Panchayat, and to management of all of this, there shall be a specific creation of State Finance Commission. And at the Zila level, the district collector shall actually act as a chief executive officer governing over all of the schemes and the functioning. Ultimately, the Gadgil Committee of 1988 provided for the direct elections at all the three levels, panchayats, blocks and Jila Parishad, and the creation of a state election commission to actually conduct the election. Following the suggestions of all of these committees, it was Narasimha Rao government who brought the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992, which added the Part 9 and 11th schedule, which actually lists down the 29 specific functions which can be diluted by the state government for the functioning of the Gram Panchayat. But then there are certain specific constitutional obligations which has been put on the state government. The first is to actually create panchayat and hold elections at the regular intervals of every 5 years. Then there shall be creation of a 3-tier system in every state except those states which have population less than 20 lakhs, for example Goa, Manipur, Sikkim, etc. Also, the member at all the 3 levels now are actually directly elected by the people. So, the specific functions of Gram Sabha which they perform, they are listed from the Article 243 to Article 243O of the Constitution. Where what constitutes Gram Sabha? Gram Sabha basically is the village assembly which consists of all the registered voter. So in this context, you guys can recall the 61st Constitutional Amendment Act of 1989, which basically provided for universal adult franchise, which basically means that when a person becomes adult or at the age of 18 years, irrespective of the income, irrespective of any land holding like Uttaramerur inscription, or irrespective of kind of the educational level attainment which this person has, that person becomes eligible to act as voter to elect their representatives in state assembly, in parliament, as well as in the Gram Sabha or Gram Panchayat elections. Thus, any person who is registered in a particular village and at the age of above 18 years actually act as a member of Gram Sabha. Then there is a reservation which is provided for SC/ST at all the 3 levels on the basis of population. 33% seats reserved for the women. There shall be dissolution of Gram Sabha which will take place every 5 years like Lok Sabha. So it does not act as a permanent body like Rajya Sabha. Then the state election commissioner who will supervise the election. He will be appointed and his tenure will be decided by the governor. However, keep this in mind that a state election commissioner can also be removed just like chief election commissioner by the president only. Then the comptroller and auditor general does not audit the report of panchayat. And if you want to become a pradhan of your village, to head the kind of Gram Panchayat, then the age qualification for you is 21 years. Can anybody tell me in the comment box what is the age qualification to become a member of Legislative Assembly, an MLA in your state? So the moment you guys get to this particular fact that by the time you guys become 21 years old, you can actually contest the Gram Sabha election. Seems like a good opportunity to actually participate in the grassroots level decision making and policy making and the implementation of the various schemes of the government. However, the article today actually provides us a different picture, where it says that why these Gram Sabhas are not aspirational for youth. The article says that ask any young person if they dream of leading a village or becoming a sarpanch, and you will likely to be met with a puzzled silence. The educational curriculum largely focuses on Lok Sabha, Vidhan Sabha elections, parliamentary governance, or even global models such as United Nations, but it remains completely silent on the Panchayati Raj institutions that actually form the bedrock of Indian democracy. This absence from classroom has actually turned the Gram Sabha into a distant administrative concept. So, do we have sufficient amount of data to actually showcase the less youth participation at the Gram Sabha level? The answer is no. But we do have enough amount of data which has actually been provided to us by the Kautilya School of Public Policy, which actually showcases the lack of political attitude which prevails among the youth in our country. For example, the study by the Kautilya School of Public Policy showcases that how our country has a huge demographic dividend, where more than 50% of our population is currently under the age of 30 years. So we have a young and vibrant population at this point of time. However, when we look at the 18th Lok Sabha elections, which actually concluded in the year of 2024, the average age of member of parliament comes around to 56 years, where only 12% of the MPs are actually below the age of 40 years. And when we compare that with the data of the voters who are actually voting for these people to get elected, the voters registered between the age of 18 to 29 years actually form 22% of the total voters. Thus, the Kautilya School of Public Policy call this phenomena where the older leader are actually who are ruling the people, who are making the policies for the people, are actually being elected by the adult population. So there is a kind of a generational gap which exists, and this form of governance has been termed as gerontocracy. Just look at the article here, where an Or Media survey across 128 countries actually found that the young adults, they are actually choosing the protest over traditional politics, where the kind of the youth who are interested in politics, they're actually rejecting the political engagement for street activism. So obviously there is a kind of a apathy which exists when it comes to the participation in the politics. Why I will actually get down in the street to clear the mud, right? It is very easy for me to sit and complain and kind of post on social media. But the kind of the question which shall arise in your mind at this stage is that why the youth is actually absent from the Gram Sabha or from the politics of our country in general. What are the causes behind the absence? So to understand that, we will actually take up a case study. The case study of youth participation in Gram Sabha, which was conducted in the Beda Dukka Gram Panchayat in the state of Kerala, where the people who constituted the age of 18 to 39 years actually formed 53% of the population of the Beda Dukka Gram Sabha. Out of this 53% of the population, 65% of the people actually accepted that they have not taken participation in the any activity of Gram Sabha, for which they also cited certain reasons. The first and foremost was the lack of social infrastructure which actually prevails in the rural areas, such as for example good schools, hospitals, etc. Thus which has acted as a kind of a push factor for this young population to actually move toward the cities. For example, as per National Family Health Survey 5 data, the kind of total number of more than 50% of migrants who are moving in the cities of Delhi, Mumbai, Bengaluru, etc. More than 50% of these migrants actually falls in the age of 18 to 30 years, where they have deserted their villages for what? For good education, higher education, for the search of white collar respectful jobs. Many of the time the caste factor also plays a role here, because when you are living in the village, you are actually forced, or the kind of the various caste hierarchies actually imposed upon you. Many of the time the youth actually migrates from the villages to the cities in more cosmopolitan culture to actually kind of break away from those caste barriers. The second major issue is the financial barriers which exist in the participation of the election. So for example, the huge issue of bribe and corruption which prevails, also reflected in the corruption perception index ranking of our country, where we rank as abysmally low as 96, released by Transparency International. This bribe and corruption which is actually involved even at the local politics, where you are required to have a sound financial backing to actually bribe the voters to lure their votes. It was even evident in the recently concluded Delhi University election, where a lot of celebrities actually campaigned for college level students who were contesting for university level election. And this issue has also been highlighted by Honorable Prime Minister in his Mann Ki Baat, where he said that how youth feel that they cannot enter the politics due to lack of political legacy, where you do not have that much of political influence or financial sound backing to actually kind of purchase the votes. The third major issue is the criminalization of politics which has taken place. Just look at the data here, the concern which was also highlighted by the Supreme Court, where it flagged the alarming increase in the incidence of criminals in the politics. Just look at the member of parliaments with pending criminal cases, how that has consistently increased year after year, even though the change of regime has taken place. Where Supreme Court observed that rapid criminalization of politics cannot be arrested by merely disqualifying the tainted legislator, but should begin by the cleansing of the political parties itself. And this criminalization of politics actually disincentivizes the youth as well as their families, because we have developed a kind of a negative connotation with the concept of politics itself. And that is also a kind of a very big role there is played by various gangsters, mafias, big businessmen who actually creates entry barriers for such innocent youth as well. Then over and above that, there exists less awareness among the youth about the importance of the political attitude. Just look at the data here from the Beda Dukka Gram Panchayat itself, where the youth is actually more ready to participate in youth club and libraries, kind of rant on social media, or take a help of self-help group, rather to actually enter into the politics and clear the dirty mud. Ultimately leading to what? Just look at the data here. 30 crore missing voters in our country, which are mostly young, urban or migrants. With a voter turnout of 67% in the 2019 Lok Sabha polls, India actually ranked 74th among the 162 countries, just showcasing the lack of political attitude which actually prevails among the youth in our country. If you look at the same issue from the gender lens, you guys can recall a very famous web series and celebrated one as well called as Panchayat, where in the last scene, even though Manju Devi, the protagonist, has lost the election of the Gram Panchayat, she is actually visibly less distressed than her husband, showcasing the kind of the concept which prevails in the rural areas, and that is called as Pradhan Pati culture. Look at the heading here. In Madhya Pradesh, and this is of the year 2024, where the husbands of the elected Gram Panchayat women, they actually took oath. And such issues prevails in the rural area. Why? Because of the deep-rooted patriarchal norms. The kind of the dual role syndrome, where the woman is associated with the care responsibilities. And because of that, obviously, they do not have the time to attain a skill or to go and attain the various functions of Gram Sabha and Gram Panchayat. So the male member actually kind of makes sure that their wife contests election on the 1/3 reserve seat as suggested by Thangan committee, and then they actually ultimately hold the power in their hand, showcasing what? The caste and gender based discrimination which prevails. And obviously at the grassroots level, as we were talking about, the apathy which has existed about kind of enlightening the people or doing social engineering among the women, among the youth, about the functioning of Gram Sabha and Gram Panchayat, thus lack of capacity building or training. Then as a, let's say for example, future Gram Pradhan, you can also argue that, sir, even if I am going to get elected, there exists a problem, and that is lack of financial as well as functional autonomy which actually is imposed upon you. Because from the constitutional amendment, there are certain compulsory provisions like organization of Gram Sabha, direct election of seats at all 3 levels, indirect election for chairperson at the intermediate and district level, the minimum age which has been set at 21 years, but then there are certain voluntary functions. So it is completely the prerogative of the state that whether it want to kind of dilute those functions to the Gram Panchayat or not. Such as, for example, the power itself to function as institution of self-governance, or to perform any function of the 11th schedule which lists down 29 items, or to grant financial power and taxation power, or even to make a grant in aid to Panchayat, that is complete prerogative or discretion of the state government. Thus, the today's editorial, which has been written by IS officer of 1995 batch, it basically highlights that how the government has taken proactive steps in this direction by creation of Model Youth Gram Sabha, which is a collaborative effort of Ministry of Panchayati Raj, Education, Tribal Welfare as well as Aspirational Bharat Collaborative, where there is taking place a kind of a simulation of the real Gram Sabha process, where the young students, they actually play the role of Sarpanch and ward members, leading to youth participation in the creation of budgets and development plan. Thus kind of highlighting the Mysuru Declaration of 2021, where the government held and recognized the importance of citizen-centric governance. So, as per the today's editorial, under the phase 1 of this Model Youth Gram Sabha 2025, there has been kind of the creation of this Model Youth Gram Sabha in more than 1000 schools across 20 states and union territories. The editorial also provides for certain way forward, like for example, to actually sensitize the people, provide them formal knowledge about the local government and its functioning and the power which you can hold in your palm to actually change the landscape of the grassroots level, and that shall be promoted under the National Education Policy of 2020. To actually organize annual panchayat development seminars in colleges, in schools, as well as to create youth coordination committee in every ward, where they can actually identify the issues which prevails at the local level, and thus they can take active directions, and maybe they can also come up with some innovative solutions. If you people have some innovative suggestions to actually promote the idea of youth participation in the politics, please comment down and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights the prevailing debates around the climate hoax and climate alarmism, and thus try to establish the seriousness of the issue of climate change, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment conservation. So let's first try to understand the context of the news. Around 2019 to 2021, Mr. Gates actually started his climate messaging, and that leaned towards apocalyptic urgency, where Bill Gates actually issued dire warnings of collapsing ecosystem, mass displacement, and a narrowing window for the countries to actually achieve net zero. For example, our country has set a target that we are going to become a net zero country by the year of 2070 as per our Panchamrit target. According to Bill Gates, if countries are going to kind of set up such far-fetched targets, then the global warming impact is going to have dire consequences on the humanity. The article today highlights that how this rhetoric actually helped spur public concern, but it also led to the production of pitfalls of climate alarmism, which is to overstate catastrophic inevitability without also emphasizing of the adaptive capacity of the countries as well as human agency. So such alarmism can actually mobilize communities in the short term, but in the long term, it actually invites disbelief and political backlash, as it did with the current President of USA, Donald Trump, is stating that this concept of climate change is the greatest con job which has been perpetrated on the world, thus calling the concept of climate change actually a hoax. And the moment he got to the power, US actually ended up withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, which was adopted in the year of 2015, where there was a target set to actually restrict down the global warming, which is taking place because of the emission of greenhouse gases, to 2 degrees Celsius by the end of century, that is 2100, from the pre-industrial level. Keep this in mind, that not only the head of such important governments, but also various companies who actually utilize fossil fuel or create products which are based upon fossil fuels, like for example ExxonMobil or for example Shell, often they have been kind of alleged that they discredit the climate science, and thus in the hide of that or in the cloak of that, they keep on making large investments in the fossil fuel, which leads to the production of such greenhouse gases, which is causing this global warming. Also, many of the groups, like for example Responsible Energy Citizen Coalition, which takes place in European Union, many of such groups have also been alleged that they are using a tactic which is called as astroturfing. What is astroturfing? So many of the times such groups actually creates movements which look like a spontaneous movement at the grassroots level, but rather they are actually funded by these large companies, where they actually sensitize the people or create an echo chamber around them to actually keep on using the fossil fuel based products, while also kind of discrediting the various green energy policies which are being adopted by the countries, specifically in the European Union. So various supporters of this concept that climate change is nothing but a hoax, this global warming is nothing but a hoax, they actually propounds various theories. Theory 1 is that there exists inadequate research on the pre-industrial level of the global temperature. So right now we actually measure the kind of the temperature which exists at the upper troposphere of all the countries, and we take a mean of that. and we call it a global temperature. But does the kind of the equipment which we have now, does that existed back in the year of 1850s? That is indeed questionable. Then there is theory 2. Theory 2 says that a prolonged La Nina cooling which has taken place in the tropical Pacific has actually kind of lessened the impact of global warming or greenhouse gases by 0.15 degrees Celsius. But this cannot be considered to be a kind of a prevailing phenomena for a long term. The third theory is that this climate scheme has actually been created by have countries. Have countries basically implies the global north, the developed nations, to ensure the underdevelopment of have-not countries or the developing and underdeveloped nation. To understand that, we can actually take the example of carbon border adjustment mechanism which is being imposed by European Union on Indian product, where they are saying that if the product has been created, let's say for example a product of steel has been created, and for that there has been emission of certain level of carbon dioxide, then we are going to tax your product. Now the concept is that by putting this tax on the name of climate change, kind of the prevention, don't you think it is actually going to make our product costlier in European market? Right? Basic economics, supply and demand. As the price has increased, the demand for that product is going to decline. Thus, don't you think that there will actually take place a lot of production losses and job losses which will actually take place in our country? Why? Because a developed nation which can actually secure or has provided a good social security net for their people, they can actually kind of afford to put such taxes on developing nations like our country. And this was exactly what was termed at COP28 by the President of Russia, Putin, where he said that how such underdeveloped nations will actually feed their future if you want them to completely transition to green energy without providing them any kind of climate financing. So don't you think it is actually going to be unsustainable for the have-not countries? The second and the much more major argument is that if we refer to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if we refer to the NOAA of USA, or even if we refer to the Ministry of Environment's reports which has been published by our country, they actually establishes that climate change is actually the reality. For which purpose we are going to take the help of the report which is called as State of Global Climate Report of 2024. According to which the average temperature rise from the pre-industrial level has already reached to a level of 1.45 degrees Celsius. Thus, as per the 6th Assessment Report 2023, which was released by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world is going to breach Paris Agreement target within next 2 decades. And by the end of 2100, the temperature is actually going to increase by 3.1 degrees Celsius. Thus, when the temperature will keep on increasing, the water keeps on getting boiling up, the sea surface temperature keeps on increasing, and thus the water keeps on expanding and thus rises. Thus, even the global mean sea level rise is going to be 1.3 meter from the 2014 level itself. Also, the sea surface temperature rise can also be seen from the heat content of the world ocean, which actually reached to the highest boiling point in 2023. The marine heat wave across the 5 oceans which we have, which we can arrange from the largest one to the lowest one with the help of mnemonics like, for example, PASA, that is Pacific, Atlantic, Indian Ocean. So, in all of these oceans, the marine heat wave actually extended up, covering 32% of the total area. So the impact of climate change is also visible right in our country itself. For example, the water scarcity which we are facing. Just recall the Composite Water Management Index released by Niti Aayog, which actually predicts that the 25 large cities of our country is going to run out of groundwater by the year of 2025 itself. Just recall the kind of the droughts which we face in the region of Marathwada, or the kind of the repeated flash floods and the intensification of tropical cyclones which we are facing. Also, this rise in sea surface temperature is going to have a detrimental impact specifically on the small island state. So as per the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there exists 3 billion people who live in the areas which are highly susceptible to the climate risk, and almost 60% of these people actually live in the small island states who actually have small land masses, and thus they have very low-lying coastal areas. And as the sea surface temperature will increase, as the water will expand and the mean sea level rises, don't you think there will take place inundation of the large amount of coastal area, leading to the loss of land to live, loss of life as well as various kind of property damage. Then these fragile ecosystem, they are also pronounced and are vulnerable to the various natural disaster. You guys can recall the kind of the rampant damage which was caused by the Melissa cyclone which recently hit Jamaica. Also, these small island nations like for example Papua New Guinea, your Kiribati, Mauritius, they have high dependency on the natural resources. And when these natural resources are going to succumb to the impact of global warming and climate change and the extreme weather events which are taking place, don't you think these people will eventually start migrating? And this climate change forced migration will actually lead to the further issue of refugees and migration among the developed nation. There are certain nations who are already facing a lot of threats, like for example Mauritius, which is estimating a loss of $100 million by the year of 2060 due to the loss of land to the sea. Or for example Kiribati, which has already started purchasing land in the other countries to actually relocate their endangered population. And this was the issue which also was highlighted by UPSC in this year paper itself. Try to answer these questions as well. Moving forward, why this debate of whether climate change is a hoax or is a reality is so much important for our country? Because the global warming woes which is already being faced by our country, where the mean surface temperature has already risen by 1 degree Celsius from 1950. And specifically after the LPG reforms which took place in the year of 1991, there has been increase of 0.5 degrees Celsius from the temperature of 1991 itself. The evidence of that was in 2024, we actually faced as a country 77 heat wave events which actually spanned a cumulative of 536 days across the country. Also, this climate change is going to be a major woe for us. The reason for that is because we are the third largest energy and oil consumer, where as per our Ministry of Petroleum, our energy demand is actually going to grow 2.5 times by 2047 as we are aspiring to become a Viksit Bharat. Also by the year of 2057, the 1/4 or 25% of the total incremental global demand will actually come from one country, and that will be our country. And thus, even though we have set ambitious targets under the Panchamrit target, the reality of today is, as of November 2025, our total installed power capacity was 456 gigawatt. However, the coal-based thermal power plants, which actually generate those greenhouse gases leading to global warming, they were responsible for the generation of 217 gigawatt, or a total of 71% of the power generation. When we are saying that the global warming is increasing, these heat waves are taking place more frequently, don't you think that our cooling demand is going to increase as well? And thus by the year of 2030, our cooling demand itself is going to reach to 200 gigawatt as per International Energy Agency, with people actually adopting for more use of air condition and thus more release of greenhouse gases. Thus, in the 6th assessment report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change held that it is unequivocal that human influence has indeed warmed the atmosphere, ocean as well as land, for which there were certain steps which were taken across the years. For example, the Article 11 of the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change actually tried to establish a financial mechanism entrusted to the Global Environment Facility. And the Article 11 of the Kyoto Protocol actually adopted for the establishment of an adaptation fund. So when we are saying that, okay, these developing and underdeveloped nations, they shall actually transition to the green energy. For that, they shall be provided an adaptation fund by the Annex 1 or the developed countries like China, USA, France, Germany, etc. This was also held in COP16 Cancun, where there was a standing committee which was created on finance, and it was decided that $100 billion will annually be financed by these developed nations to these have-nots by the year of 2020. And thus they also created that because of the intensification of climate change which is taking place, intensification of, let's say for example, tropical cyclone, because of global warming, the kind of impact which is taking place in these underdeveloped nations, like for example in the case of Melissa cyclone in Jamaica, they will also be provided with a loss on damage fund, which was actually established in COP19 in Warsaw, also called as Warsaw Mechanism. Ultimately, the Article 9 of Paris Agreement actually set up a new collective quantified goal, where the idea was that $100 billion minimum annual finance shall be provided by Annex 1 countries. But the have-nots, the underdeveloped nations, the developing nations, which also include India in this case, keep this in mind, as a voice of global south, it actually asked for financial help for the adoption of greener technologies in COP29 as well, where they said that we need to do high expenditure on energy infrastructure. And if we keep on focusing on that, we will also not be able to kind of improve the other social infrastructure in our country. That will lead to huge fiscal deficit for us. Also, this financing is a critical component to actually accelerate the adoption of cleaner technologies. But if you people are offering us debt instruments, like by China for example, we do not want to fall in debt traps. Then following the Article 9 of Paris Agreement, as per the calculation of UNCTAD, these countries were actually required a financing of $6 to $14 trillion approximately, and thus these developing nations demanded of climate finance mobilization of $1.3 trillion per year by the year of 2035 to actually adopt for green energies in the COP29 to actually meet the target of Paris Agreement. But the developed nations led by USA, which actually eventually backed off, it said that we can maximum provide you $300 billion or 25% of your demand. The irony is that this global north or developed countries actually constitutes 82% of the carbon budget. So keep this in mind that when we are saying that USA has actually withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, the irony is, the hypocrisy is that USA is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases after European Union. Also, under the capitalist model which is being followed by Donald Trump, a mere estimation by the International Energy Agency is that USA is actually going to produce 30 to 40% more crude oil in the next 4 years, which will eventually lead to the production of 4 billion ton of carbon dioxide. Our target by the year of 2030 under Panchamrit target is to create a kind of a carbon sequestration of 2 billion ton. The double of that will be released by USA in the next 4 years. Even in the COP30 which is going to take place, major emitters has actually delayed update on climate goals. European Union is yet to finalize the consensus. Thus, among all of these issues which prevails, India has actually emerged as a margdarshak, where we have taken proactive steps to actually deal with this issue of climate change. For example, the impetus on solar energy which we have put under Pradhan Mantri Kusum, where we are basically trying to, provide solar energy, lead pumps, agricultural pumps for the use of farmers, as well as the kind of the installation of rooftop solar photovoltaic panels under Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. The target to actually produce 5 million metric ton of green hydrogen by the year of 2030 under National Hydrogen Mission. The kind of the adoption of 20% of ethanol blending which we have done in petrol already, thus kind of reducing the consumption of fossil fuel. And for that purpose, we have also joined Global Biofuel Alliance. Then for the farmers, we are also have created a kind of a waste to energy plants under Govardhan scheme. All of this to eventually achieve the target of Panchamrit, where we envisage that by the year of 2030, 50% of our installed energy capacity will actually come from renewable energy. For which, as a way forward, you guys can also write about the urban afforestation which is required under Miyawaki method to actually decrease the heat island effect, to create more blue and green spaces, and to actually create high performance building, the one which you guys can see in the picture. Keep all of these things in your mind, and specifically the concept of green and blue water spaces in the urban areas, which will actually help you to understand the next topic, where we are going to learn about a very important concept for your prelims examination, and that is the Ramsar site. Why it is in the news, what is the context. So the conservationists, wildlife officials, academics and students have actually got together to push for Ramsar Site Tag for 2 interconnected wetlands in the central Assam's Nagaon district. The Romari Dondua Wetland Complex is within the 70 km square Lakhua Wildlife Sanctuary, which is again in the Assam, and this Lakhua Wildlife Sanctuary actually forms the part of Kaziranga Tiger Reserve. this complex has been recording more birds, keep this in mind, that the only two Ramsar sites in the northeast, that is Assam's Dipor Bill and the Manipur's Loktak Lake. So the question which shall arise in your mind is that why such tag of Ramsar site is of so much of an importance. What are Ramsar sites? Ramsar sites are basically the wetlands which are designated as one of the international importance for the conservation under Ramsar Convention, which was actually signed in the city of Ramsar, that is in the Iran, in the year of 1971. On which date? The date was 2nd of February, which is now celebrated as the World Wetland Day. What is the theme for this year 2025? It is to protect the wetland for our common future. So this basically kind of resonate with the 1987 Burnt Land Report, which actually established for the first time the concept of our common future, leading to the development of the idea of sustainable development and ultimately the Rio Earth Summit, which took place in the year of 1992. So which was the first Ramsar site to be designated across the world? That was Cobourg Peninsula in Australia in the year of 1974. However, the convention actually required a certain number of countries to actually accede to this particular convention. Only then it will come into the force. And thus in 1975, the convention came into the force with UNESCO acting as a depository. Our country actually kind of joined or became a contracting party to this Ramsar Convention in the year of 1981, with Chilika Lake in Odisha and Keoladeo National Park in Rajasthan were declared as the Ramsar sites. So the question which shall arise in your mind is that what are the kinds of the various wetlands which we actually identify as one under our Wetland Conservation and Management Rules of 2017. What actually constitutes a wetland? So under the definition of this 2017 Act, the wetlands in our country basically includes the area of marsh, fen, peatland or water. It can be natural or artificial. It can be in the nature of permanent or temporary. The water can be static or flowing. Even the nature of the water can be fresh, brackish or salt. Even in the marine water region, till the depth of which at the low tide does not exceed 6 meters, it is included as a wetland in our country. But river channels, the kind of the wetlands where the paddy fields exist or it is being utilized as a cultivation area, or human-made water bodies or tank, or any such structure which is created for aquaculture, salt production and irrigation is not included in the definition of wetland, and thus remove it or eliminate the statement if it contains any of these. Keep this in mind that India's Ramsar wetland actually comprises 10% of the total wetland area in our country. And the Ramsar sites which we have, they basically constitutes 5% of our total geographical area spread across 18 states. Also, no other South Asian country has as many sites, though this has much to do with our country's geographical breadth and tropical diversity. Now, here the article suggests that we have 85 Ramsar sites, but no. As per the recent additions which has been made, now our country has 93 sites and thus we have even surpassed China, which has 82 Ramsar sites. Keep this prelims fact sheet very important for you. Which is the largest Ramsar site in our country? That is Sundarban wetland. Which state has most Ramsar site? That is Tamil Nadu with 20 sites. Now when we talk at the global level, which country has the largest number of Ramsar sites? That is United Kingdom, surprisingly, and that is more than 175. Also, which is the largest Ramsar site in the world? It is Nagiri Nadombe Wetland Complex in the Democratic Republic of Congo. All the new Ramsar sites which has been added in the year of 2025 from our country has been listed here for you. For example, Sakkar Kottai in Tamil Nadu, Khecho Palri in Sikkim, Udva Lake in Jharkhand, Kitchen and Menar Wetland Complex in Rajasthan, as well as Gokul Jalashay and Udaipur Jheel in the region of Bihar. The question which shall come in your mind is, why? Why such wetland conservation is so important? Because of the kind of the ecosystem services which they provide to us. First and foremost, where they actually act as biological supermarkets, where they act as a very important food source for the flora and fauna of our country. For example, let's assume that there is a dead fauna or dead aquatic fauna in one of such wetland. So obviously further degradation of that will take place because of the microbes, and that will lead to the creation of organic matter which we called as detritus. Now these detritus further act as a food source for various crustaceans, various reptiles, amphibians, etc. Thus, there takes place a complete food chain which prevails in this wetland region, and that is why they actually act as an important source for various flora and fauna. That is why many of these Ramsar sites actually forms the center of the Central Asian flyway, which is actually taken by the various migratory birds, where they actually follow the movement of the sun and they move from the harsh winter of the north to the south when the sun moves towards Tropic of Capricorn. Second, these wetlands actually act as natural sponges against surface water runoff, flood control, etc. Where according to a question of UPSC, these wetlands which actually function as the kidney of the earth. The water cycle in these wetlands contains of surface runoff, subsoil percolation as well as evaporation. Also, let's say for example there are certain metals or minerals which falls in these wetlands. Let's say for example your sulfur dioxide or potassium, etc. Then these minerals are actually utilized by the aquatic plants as fertilizer for their growth, and that is why they actually function as a kidney, because the aquatic plant they absorb heavy metals as well as excess nutrients. Then these aquatic plants also consume the carbon dioxide to actually release oxygen, thus providing a pivotal role in the carbon sequestration as well as diversify the economic portfolio of the region. So for example, Loktak Lake in Manipur is a very important tourist site as well. So it's very important for the local economy. And that is why there has been taken place various conservation efforts at global level as well as in our country. At global level, the COP14 of the Ramsar which took place, and that was conducted by Wuhan in China. There was a kind of an idea which was propagated to prepare a fifth Ramsar strategic plan, where each and every country will get a particular directive to be followed and a certain level of conservation status to be maintained. The idea was to actually align it with the targets which we have set for ourselves under UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Then a group of countries like for example Colombia, Ecuador, Zambia, they took a freshwater challenge to actually rejuvenate the various wetlands which they have lost. Also on the similar line, there is a development of spawn cities or the creation of more blue water spaces which is being done in the cities of China as well. Also, United Nations Environment Assembly has also suggested for lake and natural based solutions to rejuvenate these kind of wetland, and that is exactly the idea which is actually being adopted by the government under the Amrit Dharohar scheme, where we are actually trying to rejuvenate the water bodies, to actually increase the carbon stock in them, and ultimately create a kind of economic opportunities around these wetlands by the promotion of ecotourism. Similarly, there is a mangrove restoration scheme which was launched by the government in the budget 2023, where 80% funding is being provided by the central government for the restoration of mangroves, and the target which we have set for ourselves is actually to expand it to more than 19,000 hectares. Then we understood the importance of social engineering in the context of panchayat. Similarly, to actually sensitize the people about the importance of wetlands, as I was trying to do with this particular session as well, the government has launched Mission Sahbhagita, the Ministry of Environment, to actually sensitize the people about the importance of the wetlands and their conservation efforts as well. With this, we move to the next news, where we'll try to learn about the India's heaviest communication satellite. What is the context? So, ISRO on Sunday actually successfully launched the Indian Navy's Advanced Communication Satellite, which is called as GSAT-7R or CMS-3. From where? From the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota. Keep this in mind, a very important distinction here. It is the heaviest communication satellite which has been launched from Indian soil, and it weighs 4,410 kg. The launching site is Satish Dhawan Space Center in the Sriharikota. But it is not the heaviest satellite launched by the India or ISRO, because the heaviest satellite launched by our country was GSAT-11, weighing 5,854 kg, and that we launched from the Kourou launch base in the French Guiana, where we actually took the help of a French agency's provided rocket, the name of which was Ariane 5. What is the purpose of this GSAT-7R? It actually provides us a multi-band coverage, Ku bands, to actually provide coverage over not only the landmass of our country but also in the oceanic region. And it has a lifespan of 15 years, and thus the ISRO chief held that it is a shining example of the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Keep this in mind, that it is going to be eventually placed in the geosynchronous transfer orbit by a rocket which is called as Bahubali. The question which shall arise in your mind is, what is a Bahubali rocket? So in our country, there are different types of rocket which we have. A classification for that has been provided to you. The first is a small satellite launch vehicle, which is used for the satellites which are weighing up to 500 kg. They are required to be placed in the lower Earth orbit at an altitude of approximately 500 km. Then there comes polar satellite launch vehicle, which is actually ideal for placing remote sensing satellite, Earth observation satellite, as well as scientific mission satellites, but not specifically the communication satellite, because the payload of communication satellite is actually on the heavier side. So PSLV, this is, it can place in polar, sun synchronous, and even in the lower Earth orbit a payload of about 1750 kg. Then there comes a geostationary launch vehicle, that is GSLV, which has a cryogenic upper stage, which you guys can see here, 28 tons of cryogenic propellants, that is actually used to carrying heavier satellites of about 2200 kg. The launch vehicle Mark III is also a type of GSLV only, the something which was termed as Bahubali by the ISRO chief, which can actually quite useful to do the heavy lifting launch vehicle with a carrying capacity of more than 4000 kg. And remember that it is going to be the main vehicle for communication satellite and crewed missions like a very important Gaganyaan. So you guys can see the LVM-3 here. Just look at the height which it has. The total lift of mass which can actually go up to 4000, more than 4000 kgs, as already kind of demonstrated in the launch of this particular CMS-03. Here we have two solid S-200 boosters. First they are utilized, and then ultimately as a third stage we utilize this L110 liquid booster or the cryogenic upper stage. Now, when we are saying that it is going to placed in the geosynchronous orbit, the question which shall arise in your mind is that what are the different kind of orbits which exist? All of them has been highlighted here for you. Just look here. This is the geostationary orbit, where the orbital period of a satellite is actually equal to the rotational period of the Earth. So here, this particular satellite is going to be placed in the geosynchronous orbit, which is a low inclination orbit having the around the Earth, having a period of rotation of 23 hours 56 minutes and 4 seconds, thus exactly replicating the rotation of Earth on its axis. Thus it always remains above the Earth at a constant longitude and return to the same point in the sky at the same time each day. But some of you may will argue that, sir, this is geosynchronous orbit. What is a geosynchronous transfer orbit? This is basically a kind of a transitional orbit. So let's say Earth is here and we can create an orbit like this. This particular place which is closest to the Earth is called as perigee, and this place which is very farther away from the Earth, look here, 35,800 km, this is called as perigee. So here the satellite is launched in such a way that it actually kinds of place in this orbit, because here the gravitational force immediately act as a kind of a provide for fuel efficiency, where the satellite is not using its own fuel, and then ultimately in the orbit which it has to set itself, it will use the onboard fuel only for the final adjustment. So this geostationary transfer orbit is nothing but a kind of a transitional orbit which we have to be ultimately placed into the orbit where we want it. Remember these facts and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to learn quickly about a tri-service exercise which was conducted from today, and that is exercise TRISHUL. What is the context? So the tri-service exercise TRISHUL is going to commence from Monday, with the Indian Navy leading the large-scale joint drills alongside the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force across where? At the creek and the desert sectors of Rajasthan and Gujarat, extending into the northern Arabian Sea. So it will be participated by Army Southern Command, Western Naval Command and Southern Western Air Command, where it will be supported by the Indian Coast Guard and Border Security Force. Keep this in mind that very soon we are also going to conduct another such tri-service exercise, and that is Purvi Prachand Prahar, which will take place in the Arunachal Pradesh. Why such frequent tri-service exercises are being conducted? To actually boost the interoperability, where the army tanks like for example T-90s and Arjun tanks, as well as the fighter planes like for example Rafale and Sukhoi, all of them will participate. And these aircrafts will also try to kind of perform the landing on the land craft utility vessels like for example INS Jalashwa. The idea is that there was an appointment of a committee in the year of 2016 to actually make you understand the impetus which we are putting on these tri-service exercises. The committee was Lieutenant General D.B. Shekatkar Committee. The committee which actually suggested to enhance the combat capability and rebalance the defense expenditure of the Indian Armed Forces. For which purpose the Ordnance Factory Board was actually corporatized in 2021, and there was creation of 7 new defense public sector units to actually enhance the efficiency and the accountability in the production and of the various equipments which are required for the Air Forces, the Army, the Navy, etc. The Shekatkar Committee basically suggested for greater indigenization and private sector participation to actually reduce the heavy import cost which were incurring, which was actually kind of acting as a dent on our fiscal deficit. Thus, the same idea has also been promulgated through your Defense Acquisition Procedure DAP of 2020. The same committee also suggested for 2 important things. The first, which is quite evident in front of your eyes in the form of Operation TRISHUL or Exercise TRISHUL, and that was to increase the use of simulation-based training and joint training among the services. It was the Shekatkar Committee which also suggested for the creation of theatre commands, like for example, the China-centric Northern Theatre Command, which covers the entire 3,488 very sensitive area which we have on the line of actual control, starting from the icy heights of Ladakh to Kibitu in Arunachal Pradesh. The headquarters of this Northern Theatre Command is in Lucknow. Then there is a Pakistan-centric Western Theatre Command which you guys can see here, consisting of several sensitive areas. From Indra Coal on Saltoro Ridge in the Siachen Glacier to Gujarat, the headquarters of this Pakistan-centric Western Theatre Command is in Jaipur. Then there exists a Western Command, right, down the Vindhya range, and that is responsible for India's coastline of more than 7,516 km, now calculated to be more than 11,000 km, as well as the Indian Ocean region, the headquarters for which is in the Karwar, Karnataka. Remember the headquarters specifically. And we move to the last news of the day, where the Indian Council of Medical Research has actually invited an expression of interest for what? To actually form eligible organization, companies as well as manufacturers for the development and the production of monoclonal antibodies against the NIPAH viral disease. Again, a very important fact sheet for the NIPAH virus. NIPAH virus, which is a zoonotic RNA virus which can be transmitted from animals to the humans, which is the natural host. So Pteropus fruit bat, which is also called as flying foxes, are considered as the natural host, from where it can spread to other animals like for example cattle, pig, goats, from eating the food which is contaminated by the infected bat's saliva or droppings. From these animals it can actually impact the humans as well through the contaminated body fluids of an other infected person. The various symptoms include your fever, headache, drowsiness, disorientation, epilepsy and sometimes coma as well. The first outbreak was actually reported in Malaysia in 1998. So do not look at the infographic here which actually states that it was actually done in the year of 1999. In 1999 it was eventually reported in Singapore. Do we have any vaccination available for this Nipah virus? The answer is no. Keep this in mind that there has been repeated outbreaks in our country since 2001 and the fatality range is between 40 to 75%. So 40 to 75% of the people who get infected by this Nipah virus eventually succumb to death, and that is why it is very serious disease. Keep this in mind. Also, just look at the species that spread the infection. The name of that has been given here. The various species of fruit bats which are found in our country, and they are known to be infected with this Nipah virus. To actually prevent ourselves from this Nipah virus, we can avoid the fruits which are bitten by birds or animals. To actually scrub hands after being in close contact with a sick person. To wear double mask and gloves while looking after the sick. Anyway, if you are living in Delhi, to actually make sure or prevent yourself from air pollution, you guys will be wearing double mask only, if that is working. Remember that there exists no vaccine for animals or humans, and the primary treatment for human is only of supportive care. That is why the Indian Council of Medical Research is saying that we should have a collaborative effort to produce a kind of a monoclonal antibodies to treat this Nipah virus. What are monoclonal antibodies? So we'll take up the example, the kind of the same treatment which we followed for COVID-19. This is an active coronavirus. These are the virus of the corona, and you guys can see the spike protein of these virus. What these monoclonal antibodies do, that they actually go and kind of stick it with these spike proteins. So they attach to the spike proteins that stick out of the coronavirus, and thus they prevent it from the entering the other cells in the body, and thus they neutralize such RNA based viruses. Keep this in mind. Also, this was not the last news. Surprise, surprise. Now we are moving to the last news, where we'll quickly learn about the Chief Election Commissioner, a body which has been repeatedly in the news. The reason for that is that very recently, the Chief Election Commissioner, Ganesh Kumar, actually asserted that how any act of violence will not be tolerated and voters will be able to cast their votes peacefully and freely in Bihar. This particular assertion was made a day after the poll body actually took action against officials in Patna following the violence during the campaigning which took place in Mokama, where the Chief Election Commissioner stated that the Election Commission has zero tolerance towards any form of violence which takes place during the polls. Keep this in mind, that this Election Commission of India is a constitutional body established under the Article 324 of the Constitution, and it is responsible for the elections to the Parliament, state legislative assemblies, for the election of president and vice president. As we have already discussed, it does not play any role in the election of the panchayats and the municipal bodies. Second, there takes place the appointment of Chief Election Commission and two other election commissioners who are appointed by the President of India on the recommendation of a selection committee. The selection committee, which consists of Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, and there was also the inclusion of CJI as per A. Baranwal case. However, the government very soon brought first an ordinance and then a constitutional amendment and removed the CGI from the selection committee, and thus now it consists only of a cabinet minister. The tenure of the election commissioners stands for 6 years or until they attain the age of 65 years. What are their important powers and functions? First and foremost, to determine the territorial areas of electoral constituencies on the basis of Delimitation Commission Act, to notify the dates, schedules of election, and to also scrutinize the nomination paper by the candidate, to actually grant recognition to the political parties and allot election symbols to them, and also to determine the code of conduct during the time of elections and appoint officer for inquiring into any kind of electoral arrangements. Keep this in mind, that the independence of the election commission as one of the 4 important pillars of democracy, if you guys can name the other 3, it is actually ensured by providing them security of tenure, where they can only be removed in the same manner as the judge of Supreme Court on the order of a president, where there will be a special motion which will be passed, and that shall be addressed by each house of the parliament and shall be passed by a special majority. The special majority in this case for the removal of a judge of Supreme Court as well as for election commissioner is total membership of house as well as 2/3 of the members who are present and voting. But even then there are certain flaws which persist. Like for example, the constitution does not prescribe any qualification to become the member of Election Commission of India. Even you can become. Second, The term has not been specified in the constitution. And such retiring election commissioners can actually be further appointed by the government of India. Thus, obviously, there can be some undue political influence. With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.